Greek mythology tells the story of these characters called sirens. And the sirens were beautiful half bird, half woman creatures, which is kind of bizarre to me. Not mermaids, but bird woman mix. And what they were the sirens were creatures that were along islands, and as the sailors would sail by, they had these hypnotic singing voices, and it would lure sailors off course and wreck their ships on to the rocks by the islands, and the sailors would face a doom of drowning. They were promised one thing. They promised this lure of this hypnotic, very sexualized message that drew these sailors in. And yet what was delivered instead was just the opposite. In the Odyssey, Odysseus received a warning as he sailed that the sirens would be there, and he was told to put beeswax in the ears of his sailors so that it would block the singings and they would be able to adventure on and go on where they were heading. And I wonder, as we jump into that story on this episode of The Next Stage, how often you find yourself moving along in life's journey, and yet you are lured in, you are pulled in by the temptress of porn. The promise is pleasure, and yet it delivers something very different instead. Instead of delivering the pleasure that it promises, it instead delivers pain. How often have you been led and jumped in, but rather received disappointment or unmet expectations or frustration or anger and resentment instead? The point is that you continually go to a place in pursuit of pleasure or happiness, but you end up on the rocks in your life, and that's what pornography does. Gentlemen, welcome to this episode of The Next Stage. It's a podcast dedicated 100% to your personal growth and your development. I'm Rob Stout. I'm the host of this podcast, along with our staff who produce and run and edit and do social media. There's a bunch of us who are involved, but I just happen to be the one who gets to sit here and talk about these issues. I want to welcome you, and we're going to jump into helping you summit life's climb as we take a look at this series on freedom from porn. Our last episode, we took a jump into the topic, and the idea that we packed the whole thing around was really a theological understanding of sexuality. And that the author, capital A, of sexual pleasure is the most wildly sexual being you could ever search for. That was the idea that we took a look at it, and most of us did not grow up with that idea of God. And yet God himself is the most wildly sexual creature that we could ever imagine. We took a look at the idea that eroticism just reveals that our culture's sexual desire is not too strong, but instead it's too weak. The really badness, as we see it in porn, is really spoiled goodness. It's a cheap knockoff. In this episode, I want to jump in and pack around another idea. Every episode that we do, in case you haven't figured it out, is really packed on one idea that we want to portray. And this episode is this. It's that porn is a seductive liar. It holds out an empty promise of pleasure or really happiness that you're pursuing and delivers just enough to keep you coming back. And then it has you. It has you addicted and drags you down. If you remember one thing out of this episode, remember, porn is a seductive liar. Porn is a seductive liar. Before we go any further with that, I want to talk about you. And I want to talk about what you aspire to in life. These episodes aren't just packed around some, theoretical, philosophy and stuff like that, but we really want to talk directly to you. And I would hope that as you are learning this stuff, that you would pass this on to your sons as well. Or maybe sit down and listen to this with your son and say, listen, buddy, here, I know this stuff is on your phone. I know your friends are around this. Let's talk about who you are. Let's lean into this together. I would love to get an email from a dad who shared this stuff with his son. Email me. If that is what's going on with you, email me, the next stage at Sherpa5280.com, and just share that with me. That'd be fantastic to hear. But talking about you, your innate desires are not bad. They're good. I would say that as we talk about sexuality, that really if you think about sex as a drive, it is really a drive for connection and intimacy. Men experience their deepest intimacy through their sexuality. And that is not a bad thing. In fact, last week we talked about how it is a good thing. You might call it sex, but really it's a desire for intimacy. And there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, the Creator, after putting all of that together, said it is very good. Your desires for connection are not inherently bad. And they were wired into you the way that they're wired. That is not bad either. However, just like the sirens would lure the sailors into this hypnotic and this beautiful, seductive way of getting off path, that's exactly what porn does to those desires that we have in our lives. The pleasure reaction in your brain of a dopamine hit and serotonin is a God-given thing. It did not just fluke and end up happening that way. God actually designed it that way. There's nothing wrong with it. And yet, we cause it to malfunction. We start to feed it like this high sugar, processed food diet when we were made for like steak and vegetables and healthy kind of food. We get it off track. But the way that God wired us is not evil at all. I talked to one coaching client, and this was years ago. He actually made this comment to me. He said, Rob, I wish I could overcome the evil of my sex drive. I was like, we need to talk about that. What do you mean? And he started explaining how everything else was good, but he thought that this part of him was evil in itself. We started digging into that a little bit, and I helped him make the connection that his desire for sex was not an evil thing at all. Where he was allowing it to go was ending up in a very dark place. His desire for sex actually was a desire for intimacy and connection, but instead of working to pursue that connection with a real woman who had a real life of her own and real thoughts and had real relational challenges, he had just replaced it with an airbrushed version of a siren who was silicone injected and airbrushed and was just leading him into this $100 billion a year industry called pornography. He was allowing it to pull him off course. He was shortcutting his pursuit for a cheap substitute. And I wonder, as you lean in and think about your life, if that's not the way it is for you. You aspire for connection, that the avenue for that is through your sexuality, and yet you allow it to get off course. Do you feel that? Do you see that happening in your life? I know many, many men who do, myself included. And so I want to talk to you about the problem that brings. The problem here is this. We referred to it on our last episode, but C.S. Lewis made this comment in his book, The Weight of Glory. He said, our desires are not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures fooling around with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slums because he cannot imagine what it is meant to be offered a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. That sets up the problem that we all face here. The problem is that something happening that's going on in our lives that habitually drives us off track and allures us this direction. The problem is that we get addicted to that partial award. We get addicted to that partial award that we get. 12 steps programs that I refer to a lot because I've been through them. We call this the cycle of insanity. It's a cycle of insanity. And as we dig into porn's addictive cycle here, we need to take a look at this. Here's what happens in the cycle of insanity. Let me just kind of play this out for you. We feel an impulse. And in this case, it's our sex drive. We go to something to fulfill it. In this case, porn. And what it does is it gives us a partial hit, a hit of dopamine and serotonin in our brain that gives us this sense of pleasure. But it doesn't really fulfill the needs desire, only just a little bit. So we circle back. And what happens? We find ourselves isolated and alone, and then we get angry. We get disappointed. We have lowered expectations, but we still have that need. So we go back to that thing again to get another hit of it, but it doesn't satisfy, only just a little bit. And so we begin to get in this cycle of insanity where we have an expectation that is there. It is partially met. It never gets fulfilled. And yet we go back again and again and again and again to get the partial reward that our brains get addicted to. That's the cycle of insanity. We go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And the law of diminishing return comes in. And you see it with drug addicts who go back and you're like, man, you look at a drug addict on the street, somebody who's on heroin or something like that, and you're like, how could they do that? Well, it's because it's giving pleasure, but just enough to keep them coming back, and they get in this cycle. Friends, the cycle of insanity plays out the exact same way with pornography. Isn't that what you experience? Another coaching client of mine, we'll call him John. This is years ago. This is nothing recent. But he was a guy who was a connected guy. He was really in touch with his feelings. Myers-Briggs, those of you who know that personality type indicator. He was a high F. He was a feeler. And he lived in his emotions a lot. And his want was to connect with women. And yet he couldn't. He found it awkward. He couldn't really do it well. And he was like, whatever. But what he found was that as he went to pornographic films, he kind of had that feeling met. That feeling of connection was met. And he would get in this pattern of, instead of seeking out a relationship with a girl and working on that, he would get this high that he would experience from watching porn. And yet he would come back and he described how it felt really good at the moment. And then he'd come back and he was like, God, I just felt angry. I was resentful. And I was like, yeah, that's because you went to something false to fill your need. But he said, I just can't quit. Seeking out connection, he would go to something for the fulfillment of deeper joy, and yet it didn't, and it left him frustrated and ashamed and angry and resentful. Men, do you feel like John felt? I'll bet you do. How many times do you do that exact same thing? You go to porn, be it on your phone, on an Instagram link, on, what's it called? OnlyFans, fans only? I don't even know what the name of that thing is. A site, a magazine, a movie, something on TV or whatever. You mix that with masturbating, and it connects you, and yet you come away feeling empty and, in fact, angry at your core. You know what, man? Pornographers know this. They know exactly what they're doing. They know that you are their prey. And many of you pay to be the prey. Many of you are going to places. You go to sex clubs, you go to strip clubs, you go to pornographic sites, you've got memberships, and you are paying to be their prey. Think about it. A lot of my buddies are hunters, and can you imagine a hunter walking through the woods, and all of a sudden a trophy elk walks up to him. He's like, "Hey, Bob." He's got a deep voice like that. "Hey, Bob. I see you're hunting. I know you don't have a elk tag, not a bull tag. You got a cow tag, so bummer on you. But guess what I did? I went and I got an elk tag for you. Here it is. It says bull tag, so here it is. I paid for it. Go ahead and shoot me." Of course, talking elk, that would, be kind of stupid, right? But you get the point. You are the elk in the situation. You're the one who sets yourself up to be targeted. And pornographers know exactly what's going on. It is not a $100 billion a year industry because it just kind of doesn't work. They know the exact science of what's happening. And in that cycle, you get addicted. The cycle of insanity in porn leads you to addiction. It captures you in this cycle of insanity and takes you to a place where you are addicted. Do you see what's at stake here? Do you see what's at stake? You were made for connection. You were made by this artist, this creator who made you in his image to connect. He gave you this powerful sex drive. It's powerful. And yet, you're taking it to places that are less than the goodness where the Creator created it for it to be. And you are learning to connect in ways that rob your soul and addict your life. You're settling for cheap substitutes. You're listening to the sirens that are on the shores and calling you and crashing into rocks. And many of us know exactly what that cycle is, and yet we do it again and again and again. And it's the addictive cycle of porn. That's why 35% of internet downloads are porn related. That's why porn sites receive more trafficking, more traffic than Netflix, Amazon, or Twitter, X, combined. That's why it's over $100 billion a year industry. My question is this, man. Who's using who? You think you're using it? No. It is using you and millions of you. But mostly the one who's listening to my voice right now are being hooked and on our cycle of addiction. The reason I could speak about this subject, man, is because I live in the same world you do. I am subject to the same thing you are in this area. I've told you before, I have an addictive personality. When it comes to alcohol, I agree with Chris Carter, who once said, "I can't drink like a normal person." I just can't. I told my wife that one time. I was like, "I can't drink like a normal person." She goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "Well, you can, and that's the difference." There's not an off switch there. And in porn as well, there's not an off switch. And I have learned to live a heavily guarded life around this issue as well. So I get it. I live in the same world. I remember going to a counselor in my early 30s and just going, I need help with this. I think the very first thing I downloaded when dial-up internet came along, that it takes a certain generation to know what that sound is. You Gen Zers and millennials, you're like, what's that? We don't even know. It was dial-up internet. I looked at ESPN, I think was the very first thing I looked up. The second one was porn related. And I know I'm not alone in that. But the thing I want you to know is that you are not alone either. So what's the plan? What can you do other than just go, yeah, this is what happens and all this kind of stuff? Let me give you some tools, okay? Some of the same tools the counselor gave me nearly 25 years ago. Still working with those same tools. I want to pass them on to you. There's an acronym called STAB. S-T-A-B. It's an acronym that understands, I think it taps into your vulnerabilities, or as some would say, they're triggers. I hate that word, Mike. Don't you hate that word, triggers? I get triggered. Well, all right, I got triggered too, dude. But let's talk about your vulnerabilities. Being vulnerable around STAB. STAB, S-T-A-B. S stands for stressed. You are subject to or vulnerable to porn when you get stressed. Many of you use it as a stress reliever from a hard day's work. You use it as a reward. You use it as just kind of ending the day or taking a 5-minute break and using it as a stress reliever. And I get it. We live stressful lives. But when you get stressed, watch your back. When you get stressed, go take another outlet. Go work out. Go for a walk. Listen to some 80s hard rock. I don't care what it takes for you. But when you're stressed, know that you're vulnerable. The T stands for tired. When you get run down and when you are fatigued, you are very, very susceptible for falling into this cycle of insanity. End of a long week, end of a road trip on business, third night in a row of having to be out with customers and you're just run down, man, you are vulnerable. The A in STAB stands for alone. When you are alone, you're vulnerable. Because when you are alone, you're, by definition, sometimes lonely. And you want connection. You want to relieve stress. You're tired, and so you want an avenue just to feel better. But when you're alone, you look for connection. That's when you can fall. That's when you can fall into that vulnerability trap. The B is bored. Stressed, tired, alone, bored. Bored men are dangerous men. Bored men look for something to go after. The neighbors in our neighborhood, we've got a bunch of young boys who live there, and they are just full of testosterone, running up and down the streets all the time, playing basketball, jumping bikes, playing baseball, all this kind of stuff. And I walked by one of the parents the other night on the street, and I just said, testosterone, it either explodes or it implodes. It needs to be fueled. It needs to burn constructively. They're like, that's right. When they're bored, they're dangerous. I go, yeah. That's why when I go on a road trip, number one, I'm calling my buddies who are around me, my close friends, like, hey, heading to Dallas this week, right? Heading to wherever I'm heading this week. But long days, oh man, alone, tired, stressed. We got a lot going on. And yet, one of my to-dos is no TV. I just don't turn it on. Because there's stuff there that I don't need to be seeing. I don't need to be watching. No alcohol, for sure. No social media. It's the ritual of maintaining an early to bed, early to rise, get up, work out, rise and grind kind of a lifestyle when I'm on the road. And that's what I've learned to put around myself to avoid the stress, tired, alone, and bored vulnerabilities. Second tool I'll give you is not just STAB as an acronym, but it's to examine your own cycle of insanity. It's one thing to listen to me talk about John, who I coached years ago. It's another thing for you to ask the questions, what do I need? And what do I feel when I need that? Where do I turn? What kind of high do I get when I turn there? What low results after that high? And what do I feel afterwards? Chances are that need is for connection. That need is for excitement. That need is for something like that. You turn to porn in this situation. The high that you get feels like, wow, I'm on top of the world. But quickly, real quickly, it leads to emptiness, shame, resentment, anger. And after that, it leaves you in a place of isolation. I'm going to create a download, a PDF download for this episode that will allow you to just walk through this own personal cycle of insanity, to allow you to just take a look at what that downward cycle looks like for you. You know, this whole thing reminds me of Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown, the cartoon. Remember Charlie Brown? And remember Lucy, this mean girl on the block? But Charlie Brown, 8-year-old, bald-headed kid. He had one hair on his head. I don't know how, what Chuck's issue was, but what 8-year-old or 10-year-old, however old Charlie Brown was, he's bald at 8 years old. And Lucy, my goodness, she was like one of the mean girls, right? We need to get her like some Prozac or something. I don't know. She was chronically pissed off girl. But Charlie Brown had fallen for this trick time and time and time again. Lucy would say, "Hey, Charlie Brown, you want to kick the football?" He'd go, "Yeah, Lucy, that'd be great." And he'd run back and he'd steps and go, the little noise they made when he run forward, and she'd pull the football away from him and he'd go flying through the air. Ah! But it would happen over and over and over again. Charlie Brown was in this place of this cycle of insanity, of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Charlie Brown, if he's alive these days, has more visits to the physical therapist than I do, more visits to the chiropractor. And Lucy, I don't know what she's doing. She's either running a group for unhappy women or perhaps she's a corporate lawyer. I don't know what she is. But yeah, and if you're a corporate lawyer, think about it, right? But examine your own cycle of insanity. Take a look at this STAB acronym in your life. The final thing I want to leave you with is this. Deal with your addiction for what it is. Deal with your addiction for what it is. First of all, you cannot do it on your own. Just trying to white knuckle this issue in your life and do what a lot of authors call lust management. We're just gonna dig in. We're just gonna go for it, and we're just gonna manage this thing and discipline. I tried that. I need other men around me to help me with this issue, and guess what? I get to help them as well. The story of the sirens, Odysseus. He was told about the sirens who were there, and he was told that he was supposed to put wax in the ears of his sailors so they would not hear, but he wanted to hear. He wanted to hear what this is like, so he had the sailors tie him to the mast of the ship. And whatever he did, would try to escape. He would he said, "Whatever I do, do not untie me," because he knew what would happen. He was forewarned. So as they passed by the sirens, he heard this hypnotic, beautiful sound like he'd never heard before, and it drove him nuts. Drove him crazy, and he did everything he could do to convince, but the sailors would not let him fall into that. Gosh, like so many of us, we've got to have help to manage this thing. Even though Odysseus put himself in the spot of being vulnerable that way, He knew what was going to happen. He protected everybody around him, but he knew what was going to happen to himself. He needed others to come alongside of him and rescue him from his own error of judgment. When it comes to an addictive pattern of pornography in your life, you've got to have help. You've got to have help. And so when we're talking about forming this fall, we're talking about forming Sherpa freedom groups to get men together in groups, in cohorts, to run through some really trusted, well-crafted, well-researched material to help you gain freedom from pornography. I want to offer that to you as an opportunity to deal with this stuff head on, to address it, to put a sobriety stake in the ground and go, you know what? Whatever day it is, October 5th or December 20th or whatever day it is, put a sobriety stake in the ground in this area and do the hard work that's more than just white knuckling, that's understanding your story, understanding what's in back of that, being with a group of men who don't just own it more than you do, and it's a dysfunctional level of accountability, but who want to help support you in what you want to do in your life and the kind of man that you want to become, being free from porn. So, man, when I talk about this issue of dealing with an addictive pattern in your life, not going it alone, as we said in episode 1, that's where we talk about this idea of freedom groups. Sherpa freedom groups is what we're calling it. Being around other men who say, you know what? I want to live a better way. I don't want to live in this addictive pattern in my life. Understanding some of that psychology there. Understanding some of your own story in your own life and how you got there. Understanding some of the tools that we're talking about with Jay Stringer's book, Unwanted. We're putting together groups and cohorts of men who can come together to live above this epidemic in our own lives and in our world around us that is dragging us down. Men, think about it. Freedom in your life. Doesn't that sound great? Freedom from an addictive pattern. Doesn't that sound awesome? It works. I'm a product of it myself. And I want to invite you to join one of our Sherpa Freedom groups. In fact, just send the subject line Sherpa Freedom Group to the next stage at Sherpa5280.com. Man, going back to the top of this episode, we gave you this idea that porn is a seductive liar. It holds out an empty promise of pleasure and then delivers just enough to keep you coming back. And then it has you. It hooks you in addiction and drags you down. There is a better way to live, man, and that's with this. Let me leave you with this gold nugget of the day. One of my favorite songwriters of all time, the psalmist David in the Old Testament of the scriptures. He says this in Psalm 103, 2-5. Praise the Lord, my soul. He's talking about a soulish part of him. He says, and do not forget God's benefits. Check this out. He forgives all your sins. He heals all your diseases, like an addiction to pornography. He redeems your life from the pit. He crowns you with love and compassion. He satisfies your desires with good things so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. Gosh, how beautiful is that? Forgives your sins. We know when we screw up. He heals your diseases. He redeems your life from that place you are and takes you to another place. He crowns you with love and compassion, and he satisfies your deepest desires with good things so that your youth is brought back. That part that you have destroyed comes back. Men, there is hope, and I want to invite you into that through this episode. I want to invite you to join one of those Sherpa freedom groups. Email me at thenextstage@Sherpa5280.com. And I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of The Next Stage. So excited that you've been here. If this has meant something to you, or you know a guy, or a son, or a nephew, or a friend, or maybe your dad, I don't know, who it is in your life to pass this on to. Give this a like, share a link, send it. I want you to be able to spread this to other men around you. In fact, you might grab a small group of guys around you, listen to this together, and then discuss it. And I want to invite you back for the next episode as we take a look at your brain on porn. What's going on in here? The mental side of what chemical reactions are going on in your brain that would cause you to come back again and again. But for now, go be awesome in your world, and we will see you on the next episode of The Next Stage.